The spring sun didn't just beat down on Copper Creek, it punished. And under that punishing sun, Zara Mitchell stood trembling before two men who wanted to own her father, Samuel, and the man she was supposed to marry, Vernon Holloway. His eyes were cruel. His breath smelled of cheap whiskey. He made her skin crawl. It was 1878. Zara was 20 years old, and she had just said no. That one little word had earned her a world of pain. "You ungrateful little fool." Her father's voice was a crack of thunder. His hand was lightning. It struck her across the cheek, and the world went white for a second. She stumbled back, the rough wood of the porch railing digging into her spine. "Holloway is offering good money," her father snarled. "More than you deserve." Tears sprang to Zara's eyes, hot and useless. She pressed a hand to her stinging face. "I won't marry him, father. I cannot." Vernon Holloway stepped forward then. He was the son of a cattle baron, and his cruelty was a shadow that stretched for miles. His lips twisted into a sneer. "Your pa made promises, girl. I aim to collect what's mine." A fire sparked in Zara's chest, burning through the fear. "I am not property to be collected." Her voice shook, but it held. Her father's face went purple with rage. He raised his hand again, but this time it was a fist. "You'll do as you're told, or so help me." The blow never landed. A hand shot out, grabbing her father's wrist in a grip of iron. Samuel Mitchell cried out in pain. "That's no way to treat a lady." The voice was deep, steady. It cut through the thick, hateful air. Zara looked up. Through her tears she saw a tall stranger. He wore dusty riding clothes, and a weathered Stetson was pushed back on his head, showing dark hair and eyes that burned with a quiet fire. He wasn't holding a gun, but everything about the way he stood suggested he was the most dangerous thing there. "This ain't your business, cowboy," Vernon spat, his own hand inching toward the pistol on his hip. The stranger let go of Samuel's arm. He turned to face Vernon, and something in his gaze made the cattle baron's son freeze. "When a man strikes a woman in my presence," the stranger said, his voice level, "I make it my business." Vernon puffed out his chest. "Do you know who I am?" "Don't much care," the stranger replied. "I know what you are, though. A coward." Her father found his voice again, raw with fury. "This is my daughter. She'll do as she's told. Vernon Holloway is the best she'll ever get." The stranger glanced at Zara. For the first time, his expression softened. "Seems the lady disagrees. Miss, are you all right?" Before she could answer, Vernon lunged, swinging a wild, clumsy punch. The stranger moved like a shadow. He sidestepped the blow, grabbed Vernon by the shirt collar, and threw him into the dirt. In the same motion, he stepped between Zara and her father, blocking another incoming strike with his forearm. Then he did something she never expected. He swept her up into his arms. She was so light, she felt like a feather against his chest. "Put her down!" Samuel roared. "You lost the right to call yourself her father," the stranger said. His voice was dangerously quiet now. Vernon scrambled in the dirt, pulling his pistol. "You're dead, mister." The stranger shifted Zara in his arms, his right hand a blur as it went to his own holster. His Colt was aimed and steady before Vernon could even get his finger on the trigger. "I wouldn't." Vernon froze. He saw it in the stranger's eyes. This man would shoot, and he wouldn't miss. The stranger never took his eyes off Vernon. "Miss," he said, "is there somewhere safe I can take you?" Her mind was a whirlwind. She had no one, no friends, no family nearby. Her mother was 3 years gone, and with her, all the kindness in their home had vanished. I don't know," she stammered, hating how weak she sounded. The stranger nodded once, a decision made. "Then you're coming with me." "You can't just take her," Vernon sputtered. "That's kidnapping." Is it kidnapping to save someone from a beating? The stranger asked, his gun never wavering. Back away, both of you. Who the hell are you? Samuel demanded. A grim smile touched the stranger's lips. Name's Isaac Westbrook. Remember it, because if you come after this lady with anything but an apology, you'll be seeing me again. With that, he started backing toward his horse, a big chestnut gelding tied to the post. He swung into the saddle, settling Zara in front of him, all without taking his gun off the two men. It was a movement of impossible grace and speed. "This isn't over," Vernon shouted, his voice cracking. "For your sake, it had better be," Isaac called back. He spurred the horse, and they shot down the dusty road, leaving Copper Creek behind. Zara clung to the saddle horn, her world turned upside down. A complete stranger had just carried her off. But pressed against his solid chest, with the wind whipping past them, she felt safer than she had in years. "Thank you," she whispered. His arm tightened around her waist. "No need for thanks, Miss Mitchell. No decent man could have stood by." "How do you know my name?" she asked, a sliver of unease cutting through her relief. "Small town," he said simply. "Word gets around." But as they rode, she glanced back one last time. Her father and Vernon were just two small figures in a cloud of dust. And that's when she saw it. On the side of Isaac's saddlebag, half covered by a strap, was a small tooled leather patch. It was the Holloway cattle brand, the same brand on the thousands of cattle Vernon's family owned. Her rescuer was somehow connected to the very man she was running from. And just like that, the feeling of safety evaporated, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. He wasn't just a stranger, he was a mystery. And she was riding with him into the unknown, with no idea if she was running from a monster or straight into the arms of another one. They rode for an hour, climbing into the foothills where the air grew thin and cool. The world smelled of sage and pine. Finally, Isaac guided the horse to a small, isolated cabin tucked into a stand of trees. "My place," he said. "It's private. No one will look for you here." The cabin was one room, a stone fireplace, a narrow bed, a rough table. It was sparse but clean, a world away from the sour smell of whiskey and despair that clung to her father's house. He helped her down, his hands strong at her waist. Once her feet were on the ground, he stepped back, suddenly awkward. "I'll, sleep outside. You can have the cabin." Zara looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time. He was younger than she thought, maybe his late 20s. There was a faint scar along his jawline, a white line against his sun-weathered skin. He was handsome, in a hard, worn way. "Why did you help me, Mr. Westbrook?" she asked. "Isaac, please," he said, running a hand through his dark hair. "And I told you, no decent man could have—" "Yes," she interrupted gently. "But there are plenty of men in Copper Creek who've seen my father's temper and done nothing. What made you different?" A shadow passed over his face, quick as a hawk's flight. "Let's just say I've seen what happens when good people do nothing." He gestured to the cabin. "You should rest. I'll see to the horse." He was closing a door. She could feel it. She wanted to push, to ask about the Holloway brand on his saddlebag, but the look in his eyes stopped her. It was a look that warned of deep, dangerous waters. So she nodded and went inside. The cabin was cool and dim. A rifle was mounted over the door. A few books sat on a shelf. It was a man's space, but it felt safer than home. She sank onto the bed, the reality of it all crashing down on her. She had nothing, no money, no plan. She was utterly dependent on this man, Isaac, a man who carried another man's brand on his gear. Was he a Holloway ranch hand? If so, why would he cross Vernon? It made no sense. She heard him outside, the sounds of him unsaddling the horse, the creak of the water pump. Normal sounds. Grounding sounds. He came back a few minutes later with a bucket of water and a bundle. "Brought you a shirt to sleep in," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. "There's soap by the basin. I'll bring food in a bit. I'll knock first." His consideration was disarming. "I can't stay here," she said. "I need to figure out what to do." "Tomorrow," he said, his voice firm. "For now, rest. You're safe here." He left, closing the door behind him. Zara went to the small mirror over the wash basin. The bruise on her cheek was already turning a dark, ugly purple. As she washed her face, her mind raced. She changed into his shirt. It was huge on her, falling to her knees, smelling of soap and wind. She sat on the bed, her senses on high alert. She was listening for anything, any clue. Then her eyes fell on the trunk at the foot of the bed. It was old, bound with leather straps. It wasn't locked. Her heart hammered against her ribs. It was an invasion of his privacy. But he was an invasion of her life. She had to know. She had to understand who he was. With trembling hands, she knelt and lifted the heavy lid. Inside, on top of some folded clothes, was a worn leather journal. She opened it. The handwriting was neat, precise. The first entry was dated 2 years prior. "They took everything from me. They burned my home. They left my Eliza for dead. I will find them. Every last one. I will find them, and they will know my name." His wife. He'd had a wife. A cold sorrow washed over Zara, but as she read on, the sorrow turned to ice. He listed names. 3 of them. He wrote about hunting them down, one by one. The descriptions were not of justice. They were of brutal, calculated revenge. He was a killer, a man driven by a ghost. Then she saw the last entry, dated just a week ago. Copper Creek, the last name. Vernon Holloway. He thinks he's safe behind his father's name and money. He's wrong. I've been watching the Mitchell house. He visits the girl often. She will be the way in. She is the key. The breath left her body in a rush. She wasn't a rescue. She was bait. He hadn't saved her by chance. He had been watching, waiting. He had used her father's cruelty as an excuse to get to her, to get to Vernon. Suddenly, the cabin didn't feel safe. It felt like a trap. A soft knock came at the door. "Miss Mitchell, I've got some food." Zara slammed the trunk shut, her body rigid with a new kind of terror. The man outside wasn't her savior. He was her captor. And he had brought her here to start a war. "Come in," she called out, her voice a stranger's. He entered with a tray. Beans, bacon, cornbread. The smell made her stomach turn. He set it on the table and looked at her, his expression unreadable. "We should talk about your options," he said. Options. The word was a mockery. She had no options. She was a piece in his dark game. "I have an aunt in Denver," she heard herself say, the lie coming easily. She had to create a path out. Any path. "She wrote to me after my mother died." "Denver's a long way," he observed, watching her too closely. "But it might be your best choice." Then he offered the one thing she never expected. "I could escort you, part of the way at least. Make sure you get there safely." Why? Why would he do that if she was just bait? It didn't fit. Unless he needed to keep her close. Keep his key from getting lost. The silence stretched. She looked at his face, trying to see the monster from the journal. But all she saw was a man with tired, haunted eyes. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along," she said, the words tasting like ash. His eyes met hers. "I do," he said, his voice low and intense. "And that's why I couldn't ride away." A shiver went down her spine. He was talking about her, but she knew he was seeing his wife, Eliza. He was replaying his own history, and he had cast her in the starring role. He stood to leave, gathering the plates. Got a bedroll outside. If you need anything, just call out. Good night, Isaac, she said softly. He paused at the door. Good night, Miss Mitchell. Zara, she corrected, a calculated risk. Please call me Zara, a ghost of a smile. Good night, Zara. He closed the door, and she was alone with the terrible knowledge. She wasn't just running from her father anymore. She was trapped with a man seeking vengeance, a man who saw her as a tool. And she had no idea what he planned to do with her now that he had her. Morning came, and with it, a new terror. What was his plan? Did he mean to return her to Vernon just to spring his trap? Or was she a pawn in a more complicated scheme? A knock at the door. Zara, coffee's ready. She dressed, her mind racing. She had to play along. She had to be the grateful, helpless victim until she could find a way to escape. When she stepped outside, the sight of her bruised cheek made his jaw tighten. I've been thinking, he said, handing her a tin cup of coffee. There's another option. I've been hired to drive a small herd to a ranch near Santa Fe. The trail would be safer than heading to Denver alone. Santa Fe, further away, further from her father, but further into this man's control. Was this part of his plan, to isolate her completely? Before she could answer, the sound of hoofbeats echoed up the trail. Isaac was on his feet in an instant, hand on his pistol, moving to stand in front of her. A rider appeared, a woman dressed in men's clothes on a spotted mare. Morning, Isaac, she called. Got company, I see. Morning, Ruth, Isaac said, relaxing slightly. This is Miss Zara Mitchell. Zara, this is Ruth Bailey. Owns the next property over. The woman, Ruth, had sharp, intelligent eyes. Her gaze took in Zara's dress, the bruise on her cheek, and then settled on Isaac with a knowing look that made Zara's skin prickle. Mitchell's daughter? Ruth asked. Her voice was flat. There was trouble in town, Isaac said, his tone guarded. Understanding, or something like it, dawned in Ruth's eyes. I see. She dismounted. Pleased to meet you, Miss Mitchell. Sorry for the circumstances. She seemed kind, but then she looked at Isaac. I came to remind you about our agreement, but I see you're occupied. Isaac looked flustered. The fence line. I'd forgotten. Ruth's eyes narrowed on Zara again. Then she made a decision. Miss Mitchell, if you're in need of more appropriate lodging, I've room at my place. A wave of relief washed over Zara. A way out, a way away from him. Isaac's expression was unreadable, but he nodded. Ruth's place would be safer, should anyone come looking. Safer. He said it so easily. It was settled. Zara rode with Ruth, away from the cabin, away from Isaac. Ruth's homestead was tidy, comfortable. It felt normal. But as soon as they were inside, Ruth's demeanor changed. All right, she said, her voice hard. Tell me everything, and don't leave anything out. When you're dealing with a man like Isaac Westbrook, the details matter. Over tea, Zara told her the story, the one she wanted Ruth to believe. The story of the rescue. She left out the journal. Ruth listened, her face grim. Isaac stepping in. That doesn't surprise me. He's a good man. She paused, sipping her tea. But a dangerous one. He carries ghosts with him. He mentioned driving cattle to Santa Fe, Zara said, testing the waters. He offered to take me along. Ruth's eyebrows shot up. Did he now? That's out of character. He keeps to himself. For him to offer to take you on a long journey, you must have made quite an impression, girl. There it was again, that feeling that something wasn't right. Or, Ruth continued, her voice dropping low, he has a reason to keep you close. Before Zara could ask what she meant, Isaac appeared in the doorway. He had come to work on the fence. His eyes found Zara immediately, a quick, possessive glance, before he turned to Ruth. The two of them worked on the fence line all afternoon. From the window, Zara watched them. They didn't look like neighbors fixing a fence. They looked like soldiers planning a campaign. Their heads were close together, their conversation intense, hidden. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that Ruth was part of it. She wasn't an ally. She was his accomplice. That evening, the three of them ate dinner together. Ruth was full of stories, laughing and filling the silence. It was a performance. Isaac was quiet, watchful. Finally, Ruth excused herself, leaving them alone. "The offer stands," Isaac said. "The trail to Santa Fe." "Why?" Zara asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why are you doing this for me?" He told her then, the story from the journal, about his wife, Eliza, about the men who attacked her. He told it with a raw, broken honesty that almost made her believe him. Almost. "When I saw your father raise his hand to you," he finished, his voice thick with emotion, "it was like seeing Eliza all over again. Only this time I was there. I could stop it." He was looking at her, but his eyes were 1,000 miles away, lost in a memory of fire and blood. He reached across the table, his hand covering hers. "Maybe I'm trying to save myself too," he whispered. Just then Ruth returned. She saw their hands, the intensity in the room, and a small, satisfied smile touched her lips. That night, unable to sleep, Zara crept from her room. The main house was dark and quiet, but a faint light shone from under the door of the barn. She slipped outside, the night air cold on her skin. She moved silently, hugging the shadows, until she reached the barn wall. She peered through a crack in the old wood. Isaac and Ruth were inside, standing over a table lit by a single lantern. Spread across the table was a map, and on that map, a red circle was drawn around the city of Santa Fe. "Holloway's father has holdings there," Ruth was saying. "If Vernon runs, he'll run there. It's the only place he'd feel safe." "He won't run," Isaac said, his voice cold as steel. "Not yet. He'll come looking for the girl first. He's too proud not to." "And when he does?" Ruth asked. Isaac looked up, and the lantern light carved deep shadows into his face. For the first time, Zara saw the killer from the journal. "When he does," Isaac said, "he'll find me, and the girl will be right where I need her to be." Ruth nodded slowly. "She's starting to trust you. That's good." She glanced toward the house. "But she's smart. Be careful she doesn't figure out she's the cheese in your trap." Zara pressed a hand to her mouth to stifle a gasp. It was all true. Everything. She wasn't just bait. She was the centerpiece of his entire plan for revenge. She backed away from the barn, her heart a block of ice in her chest. She had to run. She had to get away. But where could she go? Back to her father, into the wilderness alone? No, there was no escape. A cold, hard resolve settled over her. If she was a pawn in their game, she would have to learn the rules. She would have to play. She went back to the house, back to her bed, and in the morning, when Isaac asked for her decision, she looked him straight in the eye. "I'll go with you to Santa Fe," she said. His eyes lit up with something she couldn't name. Relief? Triumph? She didn't care. She was going with him, not because she trusted him, but because it was the only way to stay alive, the only way to find a moment, just one moment, to turn his own trap against him. The journey began at dawn. 2 other cowboys, Jim and Pete, were with them, moving a small herd of cattle south. They were quiet men who tipped their hats to Zara, but otherwise kept their distance. The trail was hard, dust and sun and endless hours in the saddle. Every muscle in Zara's body ached, but she never complained. She learned to ride with the rhythm of the horse, to watch the cattle, to make herself useful. She was playing her part, the grateful, resilient survivor. And Isaac watched her. Always, His gaze was a physical weight on her shoulders. He was protective, bringing her water, making sure she had the best spot by the fire, arranging his bedroll a respectful distance from hers, but always close enough to be a guard or a jailer. On the fifth night, a storm blew in. Rain came down in blinding sheets. The cattle panicked. All four of them rode out into the chaos, getting soaked to the bone as they calmed the herd. Back at the ruined camp, huddled under a canvas tarp, Isaac wrapped the only dry blanket around her shoulders. She was shivering, and she let herself lean against him, playing the part. His arm came around her, holding her close. She could feel the tension in him, the tightly coiled strength. He was so close she could feel his heart beating, a slow, steady rhythm against her back. Later, after the others were asleep, they sat by the dying fire. "Tell me about your father," he said, his voice a low rumble. She told him, about her mother's death, about his bitterness. She gave him just enough of the truth to make the lie of her trust believable. And then he told her about Missouri, about his family. He spoke of his mother, how she could see right through a person. "She would have liked you," he said. The words were a calculated strike, meant to disarm her, to draw her in. And for a terrifying moment, it almost worked. His voice was so full of lonely sorrow, she almost forgot he was using her. She almost forgot the cold-blooded killer from the journal. She rested her head on his shoulder, feigning exhaustion. He went still for a second, then relaxed, his arm tightening around her. "Rest," he murmured. "I'll keep watch." Oh, she knew he would. The days bled into one another. The landscape changed from rocky hills to flat, empty desert. The danger of the trail was real, a rattlesnake in a bedroll, a lame horse, the constant threat of dehydration. But the real danger was the man riding beside her. One afternoon, Pete, the younger cowboy, rode up alongside her. "Heard what happened back in Copper Creek," he said, his voice low. "That Holloway fellow, he's bad news. You're lucky Mr. Westbrook came along." "I was," Zara said, her voice neutral. "It's funny, though," Pete went on, squinting at the horizon. "Westbrook, he asked a lot of questions about Holloway when he first hired on with us. Seemed mighty interested in him, for a stranger." A warning bell went off in Zara's head. She gave Pete a non-committal smile and let her horse fall back. Was Pete suspicious, or was he trying to warn her? That night she watched him. He seemed nervous, jumpy. He kept looking back the way they came, as if he expected to see something there. And then, the next morning, he was gone. His horse was still there, grazing peacefully. His bedroll was laid out, but Pete was nowhere to be seen. "He must have spooked," Jim, the older cowboy, grunted. "Took off in the night." But Isaac's face was a granite mask. He walked a wide circle around the camp. When he came back, his eyes were hard. "He didn't just leave," he said. "He was taken." He pointed to the ground. There were scuff marks, signs of a brief, violent struggle. And leading away from the camp, nearly invisible in the hard-packed dirt, were the tracks of two unshod horses. Raiders. The mood in the camp shifted. The vast, empty wilderness no longer felt peaceful. It felt menacing, full of unseen eyes. That night, Isaac moved his bedroll right next to hers. "They won't get you," he said, his voice a low growl. "I won't let them." His protectiveness was suffocating. Was this real? Were they really being hunted? Or was this another part of his elaborate plan? A way to frighten her, to make her even more dependent on him. 2 days later, they saw the riders. 3 of them, far in the distance, their figures shimmering in the heat. They didn't approach. They just followed. "They're boxing us in," Isaac said to Jim, his voice tight. "Trying to push us east, into the canyons." The pressure was constant. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Sleep was impossible. Zara felt her nerves fraying, stretching thin. One night as she sat sharpening a knife by the fire, a knife Ruth had given her, saying, "A woman alone needs more than prayers to protect her," Isaac sat down beside her. "You're not just the bait anymore, Zara," he said quietly. "This has gotten complicated. Vernon sent them, but they're not just trying to get you back. They're trying to kill me." It was the first time he had admitted any part of the truth to her. "Why?" she asked, her voice flat. He hesitated. Then he told her. He told her that his name wasn't Westbrook. It was Kane. Isaac Kane. He told her the men who killed his wife weren't just land grabbers. They were Holloway's men. Vernon had been there. He had given the order. "I came to Copper Creek for him," he confessed, his eyes burning into hers. "I was watching your house for weeks. I saw how he treated you, how your father treated you. When your father hit you that day, I was going to make my move anyway. It just happened sooner than I planned." The confession hung between them. He had used her. He admitted it. But his story painted Vernon as a monster, far worse than she had imagined. "So you saved me to start a war," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "I saved you because I couldn't watch it happen again," he countered, his voice raw. "What happened to you? It was what happened to Eliza. I couldn't stand by." She looked at him, at the agony in his eyes, and for the first time, she saw a crack in the vengeful killer. She saw a man haunted by a failure he could never undo, but it didn't change the fact that her life was in danger because of him. "Who are these men?" she asked. "Holloway's dogs, the worst of them. He sent them to clean up his mess, to silence me before I can talk. The next day, the trap was sprung. They were riding through a narrow arroyo when the first shot rang out, kicking up dust near her horse's hooves. Gunshots erupted from the cliffs above them. It was an ambush. "Zara, get down!" Isaac roared, shoving her from her horse. He and Jim returned fire, using the cattle as moving cover. Zara scrambled behind a rock, her heart pounding. This was it. This was Vernon's answer. The gunfight was brutal and swift. One of the ambushers fell from the rocks, but another got a clear shot at Jim, hitting him in the shoulder. The old cowboy went down with a cry of pain. Isaac's face was a mask of cold fury. He moved with deadly precision, his shots finding their mark. Another ambusher fell. There was one left. Then a voice echoed from the rocks above. A voice she knew. "Westbrook, or should I say, Kane, throw down your guns. You can't win." It was Vernon Holloway. He stepped out from behind a rock, holding a rifle. And he wasn't alone. He had a hostage. It was Pete, the missing cowboy. He was gagged, his eyes wide with terror. "You see, I knew you'd come for me eventually, Kane," Vernon called out, a triumphant sneer on his face. "I just had to make sure the welcome was warm enough. I even had your own man lead you right to me." Pete. He hadn't been taken. He was a traitor. He had been working for Vernon all along. The betrayal hit Zara like a physical blow. The whole cattle drive had been a lie, a long, slow march into this very canyon. "Let him go, Holloway," Isaac yelled, his voice strained. "Your fight is with me." "Oh, I know," Vernon laughed. "But I wanted you to see this first. I wanted you to know that everyone you trust, everyone you try to protect, ends up dead." And then, without another word, Vernon shot Pete in the chest. Pete crumpled to the ground. The sound of the shot echoed through the canyon, a final terrible punctuation mark. In that moment of shock, Vernon's last man opened fire. Isaac was pinned down. Vernon started scrambling down the rocks, heading for her. "Now, Miss Mitchell," he said, his eyes gleaming with a mad light. "You and I have a wedding to plan." He was almost to her. Isaac was trapped. Jim was wounded. Zara looked down at the knife in her hand, the knife Ruth had given her. She wasn't bait. She wasn't a pawn. She was a survivor. As Vernon reached for her, she lunged, not away from him, but toward him, the blade held low and tight. She drove the knife into his thigh with all her strength. He screamed, a high, shocked sound, and stumbled back. The surprise on his face was worth everything. His momentary weakness was all Isaac needed. He moved from his cover, firing 2 quick shots. The last of Vernon's men fell. Now it was just them. Isaac, his gun trained on a wounded, snarling Vernon, and Zara standing between them, her hands slick with blood. "You were supposed to be the prize, not the fighter," Vernon spat, clutching his bleeding leg. "You're wrong about a lot of things," Isaac said, his voice deadly calm as he advanced on him. But then Vernon laughed, a ragged, painful sound. "You think you know what happened, Kane? You think you know why Eliza died?" "I know you killed her," Isaac growled. "Killed her! I loved her!" Vernon shouted, his face contorted. "She was my sister, you fool!" The world stopped. Sister? Eliza was Vernon Holloway's sister. "She ran away from us," Vernon raged, his eyes wild with grief and hate. "Ran off with a no-account ranch hand like you. Our father sent us to bring her home. Not to hurt her. She fought us. She fell. The fire was an accident." He pointed a trembling finger at Isaac. "You took her from us. She was ours. Her death is on your hands, not mine. I came here for justice, for my sister." The revelation struck Isaac like a physical blow. He staggered back, his face a canvas of shock and horror. Everything he thought he knew, the entire foundation of his 2-year quest for revenge, had just crumbled into dust. He had been hunting a monster, but the monster was just a man avenging his own loss. A twisted, cruel man, but a grieving brother nonetheless. And in that moment of hesitation, Vernon lunged. He ignored his wounded leg, tackling Isaac. They went down in a tangle of limbs, wrestling for Isaac's gun. Zara stood frozen for a second, the bloody knife still in her hand. This was her chance. She could run, leave them both to their ghosts and their hatred. But as she saw them struggling in the dust, she knew she couldn't. Her fight was here. Her future would be decided in this canyon. She ran toward them, not with the knife, but with a heavy rock she scooped from the ground. With a desperate cry, she brought it down hard on the back of Vernon's head. He went limp, collapsing on top of Isaac. Silence descended on the canyon, broken only by the whimpering of the wounded Jim and the lowing of the nervous cattle. Isaac pushed Vernon's unconscious body off him and slowly got to his feet. He looked at Zara, his face pale, his eyes full of a pain so deep it seemed to have no bottom. He had his revenge. But the victory was hollow, poisoned by the truth. They tied Vernon up, splinted Jim's shoulder as best they could, and left the bodies of the dead for the vultures. There was no going back. There was only forward. They rode for Santa Fe, but the journey was different now. The silence between Zara and Isaac was heavy, charged with unspoken things. He was no longer her captor, no longer just her rescuer. He was a man adrift, his life's purpose revealed as a lie. And she was no longer a victim. She had fought back, she had survived. And in doing so, she had saved him too. When they finally saw the adobe buildings of Santa Fe nestled in the valley below, it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a beginning. That night, their last night on the trail, they sat by the fire. "Everything I did," Isaac said, his voice raspy, "was built on a lie." "It wasn't all a lie," Zara said softly. "You saved me. That was real." He looked at her, truly looked at her, perhaps for the first time, without the ghost of his wife standing between them. "I don't know who I am without that hate, Zara." "Then we'll have to find out," she said. His hand found hers in the firelight. His touch was hesitant, uncertain, but it was real. They arrived in Santa Fe not as a hero and a damsel, but as two broken people who had found a strange, violent path to each other. They turned Vernon over to the federal marshal, along with the story of the ambush. With his family's reputation, he wouldn't hang, but he would be gone from their lives. They found lodging. They found work. Zara at a dressmaker's shop, Isaac with a freight company. They built a new life, piece by painful piece. The ghosts of the past were always there, but they grew fainter with each passing day. Months later, on a cool evening, they stood on a hill overlooking the city. The lights twinkled below like a field of fallen stars. "I never thanked you properly," Isaac said. "In the canyon, you saved my life." "You saved mine first," she replied. He turned to her, his expression serious. "I swore I'd never love again. I thought that part of me died with Eliza, but I was wrong." He took her hands in his. "I love you, Zara, not as a ghost or a replacement. As you, strong, brave, stubborn you." Tears welled in her eyes, but this time they were not for sorrow. "I think," she said, her voice trembling, "I've been falling in love with you since the moment you stood between me and my father's fist." He pulled her close, and his kiss was not one of passion or desperation, but of quiet, profound gratitude. A kiss that promised a future, not one that dwelled on the past. They were married a year later, a small ceremony with their new friends and the ever-loyal Jim, his shoulder fully healed. Their life was not a fairy tale. It was built on a foundation of violence and survival. But it was real, and it was theirs. They had fought for it. Years passed. They built a home. They had children, a boy with his father's dark, serious eyes, and a girl with her mother's fiery spirit. The ranch they bought was peaceful, the land forgiving. One evening, Isaac stood on the porch, watching Zara play with their children in the garden. He felt a sense of peace so deep it was almost painful. He thought back to that day in Copper Creek, to the man he had been, consumed by a need for vengeance that had been a lie. He had ridden into that town to destroy a man's life. Instead, he had found his own. Zara looked up and smiled, her face radiant in the setting sun. She walked toward him, her steps light, and leaned her head against his chest. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "Just how lucky I am," he said, his voice thick. "It wasn't luck, Isaac," she said, looking up at him. "It was a choice. We chose this. We chose to live." He bent down and kissed her, the familiar touch a comforting anchor in the quiet of the evening. They had faced down the worst of men and the worst of themselves and had come out the other side, scarred but whole. Together, they had found their justice, not in death and revenge, but in the simple, defiant act of building a happy life. If you enjoyed this story of justice and survival in the Old West, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for more tales from the frontier.